What is up, guys? Dzeeff here, and today we are finally taking a look at Teia's Yu-Gi-Oh cards. This has consistently been one of the most highly requested characters over the past year or so we are finally reviewing her cards in today's episode. As always, the idea behind these videos is not to review their cards from an anime perspective, but rather to review their cards from how good they were in the TCG. And let me tell you, Teia had some pretty great cards that did see play in the TCG over the years. And while it doesn't really matter for the type of discussion that I'm doing, I did want to mention that Teia had a 100% win rate in the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. That is why she has been such a highly requested character. Now, she did not play that many duels, but the duels she did play, she won, which is pretty impressive. So while we are going over the cards in today's video, just know that in the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, she had a 100% win rate, which is pretty exciting. Let's start off with a great classic Yu-Gi-Oh monster, Magician of Faith. This flip effect monster saw play for many years. Adding back any spell card in your graveyard was a very powerful effect back in the day, when you could add cards like Graceful Charity or Pot of Greed or Monster Reborn or Premature Burial back to your hand. There were so many great spells back in old school Yu-Gi-Oh, and Magician of Faith was a way to reuse them over and over again. Now, Magician of Faith was so good that it got banned, and it was banned for quite a while. When it returned to the game, it no longer was as powerful as it was back in the day, but this was a great card back in old school Yu-Gi-Oh, and I'm sure that most of the people watching today's video are familiar with how good it was back then. Teia also played Wabaku, a card we have talked about many times on the channel. Wabaku was a great trap back in the day. You could use it to protect your monsters for tribute summons. You could use it to make sure you survived that turn. Wabaku was a really versatile trap that saw tons of play back in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Protecting your monsters from battle and protecting yourself from battle damage was a pretty big deal. While it is unlikely that Wabaku would ever see competitive play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, it certainly is a great old card that a lot of players remember quite fondly. One card that a lot of newer players probably won't remember is Fire Sorcerer, so I'm sure plenty of the old school players remember how good this card was back in the day, but let me try to explain it for the newer players that are watching today's video. Fire Sorcerer is a level 4 fire spellcaster effect monster with 1000 attack and 1500 defense. It says flip, randomly select 2 cards from your hand and remove them from play to inflict 800 points of damage to your opponent's life points. Now, this might not seem that great by modern standards, but back in the day, holy crap, was this card overpowered. You would use Fire Sorcerer to banish cards like DD Scout Plane and then get them back in the end phase, and that 800 damage was a lot better back then as well. You could use multiple copies of Fire Sorcerer over the course of several turns to do a ton of damage to your opponent's life points. It even got to the point for about a year in Yu-Gi-Oh's history where every single person had to main deck at least one copy of Ceasefire just to counter their opponent's Fire Sorcerers. This card eventually got banned for a little while, and while it is currently back at 3 copies per deck, obviously we now have plenty of ways to stop this card, so it is no longer a threat. But for old school players, this card was a huge meta contender, and a lot of players still remember how dominant it was back in the day. Teia also played Mirror Force. Oh my gosh, this card is great. Mirror Force has been so good throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. It's also gotten plenty of modern retrains that have been good in different formats. Cards like Drowning Mirror Force and Quaking and Blazing Mirror Force, all of those cards and more saw play at different points throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. It's true that Mirror Force is not very good anymore, but I think almost every single Yu-Gi-Oh player knows how powerful Mirror Force was back in the day. This was one of the best trap cards for a very long time, where pretty much every single player was using it, and it definitely has earned its title as one of the best old school traps in the entire game. Now, I don't really know the context first of this card in the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, but Taya played Breath of Light. Pretty much every single modern Yu-Gi-Oh player, at least from the last couple of years, is probably familiar with this card already. Breath of Light is a very good normal spell card that says, destroy all face-up rock-type monsters on the field. What a powerful effect. Just a year ago we had Adamanticators as one of the top strategies in the modern Yu-Gi-Oh format, and Breath of Light was a staple 3 of in pretty much every single side deck, sometimes even in the main deck. We've seen cards like this before that destroy spellcasters or warriors or whatever, but Breath of Light is the one that focuses on rock monsters, and that was a huge counter to Adamanticators a year ago. Sometimes you'll even see it nowadays, but I think people have kind of moved on to other cards because Adamanticators are nowhere near as popular as they were a year ago, but this was a staple card for a while, especially when Adamanticators were one of the best decks. It was played back in the day when Exod was a top strategy, but that really wasn't that big of a deal because Konami quickly emergency banned Exod to prevent it from ruining the format too much. That actually was the very first emergency ban list, but maybe that's a topic for another day. And who could possibly forget Silver Bow and Arrow, a card from LOB? Now admittedly, when this card was released back in LOB, a lot of people didn't really know how good it was. There weren't that many good fairy monsters back then, but in 2007, pretty much everyone was playing fairy monsters or fairy archetypes, and Silver Bow and Arrow became a very good card. This was a time period where Acts of Despair and Mage Power and United We Stand were all banned, so you had to use a different type of equip spell, and Silver Bow and Arrow for some reason was still legal. Now that was the last format that the card was at 3 copies per deck, and now it's been banned for over 10 years. That 300 attack and defense boost is a big deal in a lot of matchups where maybe you had cards that were a little bit too small to deal with your opponent's monsters, but with 300 more attack and defense points, suddenly you can destroy whatever monster you want in battle. I think that Silver Bow and Arrow might eventually be unbanned if it does get power crept, but as it stands right now in 2021, the card is still way too powerful to return to the game. Finally, Taya played Dark Magician Girl, and I know this card has not been super competitive throughout the years, but it is just so iconic I had to mention it at the end of the video. Dark Magician Girl really has not seen competitive play, but pretty much everyone knows about it, and it is one of the most recognizable cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh, even to non-Yu-Gi-Oh players. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video going over all of Taya's best cards that she used in the anime that saw play in the TCG. If you guys were confused about any of the entries or discussion points in today's video, make sure to check the description for the upload date. I'll see you guys later. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.